spiritually, I don't look back and in any negative sense to the past, because that is part of the history of getting us to where we are now. And I'm so grateful for the revelation of those who helped me, because there have been so many people on my journey that were instrumental in moving me forward with a revelation that they received. Did they have full revelation? No, but their revelation was important to me. And I rejoice and celebrate and are thankful for them.
Yeah, I said that his kind of interests were controversial in the sense that, I mean, he was not saving rainforests and all that. He was spokesman for the World Economic Forum. And they are to do with, a population agenda and things like that.
Yeah, I personally don't think any of that has got any relevance whatsoever. The institution of the monarchy in the UK basically does not have a governmental agenda. It's just ceremonial. And whatever Charles may have as personal opinions or personal thing, he will put those on hold, because bottom line is he'll have to back off from his public statements, because that's the role. And he's already made that statement that he is not going to interfere in any way. As the role of Prince of Wales, he had the freedom to share certain things or talk about certain things or highlight certain agendas, which he now doesn't have. So I'm just, any of that type of thing, personally, I just don't think is an issue. And bottom line is, we need to be administrating the kingdom of God. I'm not concerned. The kingdom of God will fill the earth one way or another, like leaven will leaven the whole lump eventually. We just need to continue our part in that expanding of God's government and peace. All the other stuff is just noise. It's noise which can distract people from their major function of being sons of God and administrating kingdom government to see God's purposes outworked. And I'm not going to be distracted by noise. And there's hundreds of items of noise out there that can distract people if you allow yourself to get distracted. So all of the so-called conspiracies about everything can be a distraction. And to me, it's just noise. Being aware of it, yep, fine. Making sure you're not distracted by it, fine. But anything that's using fear or anything else, and this thing about depopulation and everything else, at the end of the day, God's bigger than all that, and God's kingdom is bigger than all that. So I'm not concerned about any of it, because if we do our role as sons, it won't have any effect. We need to start operating in sonship at a greater level to administrate the things which are God's purposes and God's kingdom, so that nothing else hinders or obstructs or gets in the way of that. Therefore, I'm only looking at the solution. I'm not looking at the problems. Because if you keep looking at the problems get bigger and they produce more and more fear. So what is God's solution? God's solution is for people to awaken to him, to awaken to love, and become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And that applies to whatever level of things that are going on in the world, from the normal people on the street living their everyday lives oblivious of most of what's going on, to those who may be operating at a high level of control of world financial governmental systems, who may have a lot of idea what's going on, but bottom line is they won't succeed in the long run if we continue what we're doing. And ultimately it's like, someone said the only thing it's needed for evil to continue is for good people to do nothing. Well, let's do some good. Let's demonstrate God's kingdom. Let's outwork that, and let's begin to operate in sonship. And then I'll believe all of those systems will eventually be shaken and will come to nothing. What will be left is that which can't be shaken, which is God's kingdom, which is built on a solid foundation, which can't be shaken. So I'm more concerned about making sure the solid foundation is what we're standing on, rather than concerned in all the noise and all of the stuff out there, which just promotes doubt, fear, unbelief for a future, which is essentially what the subject of my book's about. Make sure you don't get distracted by all this noise. let's actually fulfill the role that God's given us as sons, and let's establish the restoration of all things and see creation be set free. So, now, you might say, well, that's just my view and opinion. It is, because I'm not drawn onto that stuff. It's not something that I am concerned or bothered about at all, because that's not my function. And other people may have some governmental or legislative role in those areas, perhaps, I don't know, but it's not mine. And I see the bigger picture, in which when most people get distracted, they stop doing what their primary thing is. And if we focus on our primary thing, which is being sons of God, co-heirs and co-administrators of the kingdom, then whatever the plans or strategies that any enemy might have against us will come to nothing, because we're overcomers. We're those who are to subdue and to rule, have dominion. That's our function, I think. And therefore, if we function in dominion, then whatever's needs to be subdued, overcome, and dealt with, we'll be able to do. If we try and operate on the same level, or fight against it, or come against it in a spiritual warfare battle type thing, rather than the opposite spirit, then we'll get drawn into a conflict that we don't need to have. Jesus said that his enemies are put under his feet. Well, I would suggest that we are his feet. And we're not there to crush his enemies. We're there to help his enemies become a place of rest for his feet, which is a footstool, which effectively means a place of worship. So when I see all the terrible things that are going on in the world, and I see the agendas that people might have for high-level financial control, media control, any other areas of control to keep things, the status quo going, then my heart for them is to go out to them and release love to them so that they can be restored and find Jesus and find God. Therefore, they'll turn away from what they're doing and follow a different course, rather than try and, well, we're going to pull down this and pull down that, and we're going to break up this and break up that. It just doesn't work. That's what people have been doing for the last 30 years, and it didn't really work. So let's focus on what we can do, I think. But, I'm coming from my perspective on what I do and what I feel. So there may be other people who have different perspectives, and that's okay.
I've run through quite a few chapters of your book, and I understand what you're saying. The sons actually, once they mature to a certain extent, they go from reactive to creative, and from scarcity to abundance, and the kingdom is ever expanding. But even after being exposed to this way of thinking, it's when I started reading the 10th chapter, I think, or the second last chapter. I mean, it really hits you. It's like, wow, is this possible? It's absolutely a new way of thinking in the kingdom,
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, my whole desire in doing the book was to help people understand the deception that has been there within the religious systems to keep them from their sonship, and to keep them helpless, feeling that they've got nothing to do, can't do anything. Hey, we need to be rescued. To actually know, as sons of God, we have a major role in making sure that God's kingdom purposes and intentions are outworked for the restoration of all things, and therefore restoring our connection to the solar system, the elementals, the cosmos, all the dimensions of creation, and all of that is part of that. I mean, the last two chapters of the book really are probably a book in themselves, but I couldn't really leave it without ending the thing in a positive note about, well, hey, in spite of all this, this is our role, and this is what we're beginning to do as sons of God as we become mature and we begin to function in our sonship. And for me, that's the key, not to be distracted by, the things that are going on at a level which is much lower than where we are. All the things that are operating on the earth, under the atmosphere of the earth, are not even as a higher level as the earth shield, or the level where we're seated in the heavenly places. So from that perspective, if we understand who we are and our identity, and we begin to function from that place of identity by being seated in Christ in the realms of heaven, and then taking our roles, whatever they might be, because everyone's got different positions and functions within that, if we're all doing and fulfilling our destiny, then God's original purpose will be fulfilled. How long it takes will be determined, I guess, in terms of how mature we get and how quickly we get mature and how we then function in that maturity. And I think some of that is still, you could say, early days in one sense, but actually the last 2 or 3 years with the Earth Shield, engaging the West Gates and the East, North, South, all those things, that is major progress. You know, Christians have not engaged those things for a long time. Now we are. And now we're engaging it at a level where we're becoming more aware of how to outwork our sonship within those spheres of authority and government, you know, which is a challenge, I understand. But it is one of those things which, you know, I believe God is calling us into and calling us to ascend and to rise up and to become mature and to function in a level of sonship and government to bring about peace. And I think that's the key. Whenever you see people wanting to go to war, you know it's not coming out of the kingdom of God. So in all the things that people go on about in the world and all the terrible things that are happening and everything else, if it's resulting in them wanting to go to war, then they're coming from the wrong place. I would suggest they're coming from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We need to come into a place of peace, and we need to bring peace into the world. Jesus did say he's the Prince of Peace, and he did say, blessed are the peacemakers. So I think we should be focusing on peace in the fullness of what that means. Obviously, it's not just an absence of war or conflict. It is about everyone living within the rest of who they are in God, you know, and in love, joy, and peace. So, yeah, I would see, let's keep our eyes on the goal and not get distracted by the noise all around us, whether it be religious, political, or any other noise, Luciferian, or any other agenda that there might be out there. And of course, there are a number of agendas that are being promoted. Let's keep to the right agenda, which is seeing God's kingdom fill the earth and the glory of God covering the earth and restoration of all things. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think love as a framework for looking and discerning things is key. And then if you're looking at how love is manifested, it's going to be manifested in peace. So let's come in the opposite spirit to whatever's coming against us or trying to. Let's make sure we don't come in the same spirit, get into conflict, because at the end of the day, God's kingdom operates, you know, in 4 principles, which are sort of the opposite to what the world is counterfeiting. So we need to come together in union. We need to come together in covenant. We need to come together as peacemakers, and we need to come together as family. The world is operating on division, conflict, competition, conflict, and tribalism. That's where you see, how do you measure the things that are happening? What more aligns to love? What more aligns to union and covenant? What more aligns to peacemaking and family? Or does things have the hallmark of division and competition and conflict and all of these things, which will eventually produce more tribalism and just keep the thing going around and around and around, where people are in opposition to each other, rather than coming about to bring reconciliation, to bring restoration of all things. So it's a challenge. And I know, you know, when we look at what's going on around us, sometimes it can feel like, are we making any difference? You know, is anything really happening? Seems to be that things are worse and worse. And in some sense, that's just what you're seeing on the surface. And that's what essentially the media promotes all the time. But actually underneath, I think a lot is happening. You know, I've used this illustration before of the balance beam. It's like, it appears that you know, everything is this way, and the major weight is in the favor of darkness. But as more and more and more comes on the other end of the balance beam, you don't see anything happening until the weight shifts. And then the weight equalizes and then goes the other way very quickly. You know, you can have 50 people on one end and one on the other, and it's way, way outweighing everything. But if you put 5 people on there who weigh more than the 50 people on the other end, then it's going to actually swing quite quickly, you know, and actually with not equal numbers. You don't have to have equal numbers on a balance beam to actually shift it. You just have the weight shifts. And I think the weight is beginning to shift. As more and more people are coming into their identity as sons of God, the light of their enlightenment is beginning to shift that balance to bring things. And once it shifts, everything, you know, easily slides down the other way, doesn't it? It's much easier for things to slide down than climb up. So at the moment, it's like, oh, it's really hard for people to get up here into the light. But actually, you move the other thing and they all slide downhill really quickly and come to the light. So I think things are happening, but there's more to happen. And I think I'm not discouraged just because there's some things in the world that seem, you know, on the surface to be really bad. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of even more good going on. And in terms of the protection of the earth and the protection of what God is doing, that earth shield is shielding the earth from external influences and creating a place for government where God's kingdom can be outworked on the earth, and we'll see change. You know, and more and more people are awakening to that. You know, I obviously are in a privileged position where I hear people's testimonies and I hear what people are doing and what God's showing them and what they're encountering. And so I'm not discouraged. I'm encouraged because I know God's at work unveiling and bringing enlightenment to the truth, which ultimately will bring people into the freedom, because the truth that you know sets you free. And we need creation set free. And creation is only going to be set free into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So if we're not free, then creation can only be free to the measure we are. So our freedom is paramount, and we're the vital component within the restoration of everything. So God is restoring people and bringing about the change in them to reveal the true nature of who they are, and that realm of consciousness or enlightenment or awareness of the reality of that. And I believe that's happening. So, but you can't put a date on it, you know, and you can't put a time on it. You can just see there's a process going on, and that process is increasing. And the leaven is leavening more and more and more of the lump. You know, and you can mix all the different metaphors, but ultimately, I think that is taking place. You know, and you don't see it, do you? You know, when you're kneading yeast into dough, you know, into the dough, you don't see it until you allow it to prove. So there's a sense where some rest of your kneading, and then all of a sudden it starts to rise. You know, and then if you're a good bread maker, you probably, you know, knead it a bit more and give it a second proof. But then it rises to where it can actually be baked. You know, so I think there's analogies there in terms of what's happening.
Mike, when we talk about the I guess the fallen angels and that, they're intelligent, right?
Yeah.
And they have conscious awareness.
To a degree, yeah.
I'm just trying to understand, are they able, like we are, to, and probably from a spiritual point of view, be able to understand and see what's going on and react to that?
Yeah.
In other words, as opposition or whatever else. I'm trying to understand how they actually operate. Do they think? Do they plan? Like I'm thinking of how we operate.
Yeah. Okay. They obviously operate in a strategic way within the confines that they're under a control system. I don't think they have the ability just to go and do their own thing. without reference to the control system that they're under and who's pulling their strings. Once they've given themselves over to something, then they're controlled by what they've given themselves over to. And it takes quite a lot of effort to get them to the point where they remember who they once were. And then you can begin to offer them forgiveness and show them there is a possibility for them to be restored. And then I've seen them respond. And then they then shift their allegiance, because most of them they were all deceived. None of them went into it with oh yeah, great, I want to go down this route and become, this bad being, because they were created good. But they chose a route that ended up, then they were trapped into the darkness from their decision of deception, just like people. People, have followed a deceptive path, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, most of them without even really knowing what it is about. And I think it's the same with some of these beings. Some of them seem to have an assigned role, like, let's say, the destiny robber being that was assigned to us as a ministry was designed to block our destiny. And one of our statements of mandates, if you like, was helping people find and fulfill their destiny. So there was a deliberate assignment to stop us. But when I eventually saw that being restored, it then turned into a destiny angel that helped us. So that was restored back to its original non-twisted purpose. But they are aware, because you obviously have to reason with them. And you have to, in a sense, let them know that you're genuine and that your love, representing the love of God, is for them, and you've not got an agenda that's out to destroy them like they think, or like they've been told, and like most Christians have affirmed to them in terms of the spiritual warfare of, destroying them. Well, when you come with a restoration message, it's not easy for them to accept that, obviously, particularly when there's still a lot of noise out there from people who are still decrying that message and still on the whole thing of, destruction or annihilation or punishment eternally, or whatever their version of the future might be for those beings. So it's a lot of work to overcome some of that negative momentum that's there, but it is possible, and it is taking place, and I've seen it happen multiple times. So you just have to be consistent and real. If you're not genuine, then they know it. If you're genuine, then they will, little chinks in the armor take place, and the light starts to penetrate, and then things begin to operate within. So, but how all of them, how much of awareness they have of the bigger picture or everything, I don't know. I think they're sort of like certain angels that God has created, are created for a purpose, and they operate within a canopy with other angels within that order or that canopy. How much they're aware of what someone else's role is, I don't know. They're aware, obviously, of the bigger picture of God on the throne and them around the throne of God, and they're there as part of that, kingdom government. But I'm not sure that they're aware of everything that everyone else is doing, because it's not their business in one sense. It's not their role. So it may be that those beings have certain limited awareness and to do with what they're assigned to do. And it seems that a lot of them do have a twist that seems to pervert their original purpose, rather than it just be completely separate from their original purpose. Most that I've engaged then get restored and find that their purpose was perverted, and then they find their original purpose again. But so I don't know the specifics, but they're definitely self-aware in that, because you can reason with them and talk to them, and they are often very fearful of what's happening or what could happen to them. What was your intention in asking? What were you trying to get at?
Well, I was actually thinking, Mike, about when actually said there's more light that's continually coming. The government's continually increasing. And if they're intelligent beings, haven't been around forever, since they're created, the fact is they could see what's happening. And I'm just wondering, like, like, for example, when Jeff talked about the World Economic Forum, so he sees what's going on that side, and he's aware of it, as the same way the fallen angels could see what's going on, and they're aware of, and they're saying, gee, things are changing, blah blah blah. That kind of, like, do they think like, because that's how we as human beings think.
No,
I'm trying to relate it to myself, and I can't do that, I guess.
no, I don't think they do think that way, because they're shrouded in darkness. So they are not aware of the light. But when the light starts to engage them, like, you know, one of the things when we started operating on this realm of the restoration of all things, and we began to engage restoration with fallen beings, I was aware that someone did a court case in which they went to Lucifer came to the court and asked, is this true? Can we be restored? So there was some awareness of some of the things, because obviously he's losing some of his minions and they're joining our side. So there was a sense where the question was asked. Now, what the agenda in asking the question was, I don't know. But in that case, unfortunately, the person who was involved in it told them that they can't be restored. But then I had to do another court case and call that to order and then change the verdict. Well, it wasn't a verdict because God didn't give the verdict. The person gave the verdict. But I brought the opposite view that, yes, you can. So there's this conflict going on in one sense, which is confusion. It's confusion when you've got people who are so-called sons of God operating in heavenly authority. You come with the opposite stance, which is very confusing. And who are they going to trust? Because they're not trusting, because they've already been deceived and trapped. So they're not open to easily trusting again, because the last time they trusted in someone, it led them down into a path of darkness. So they're sort of, in a sense, need convincing, and they need convincing by genuine love and an expression of genuine love in that way. But definitely they're not just looking around and trying to reason things like we do, because they're shrouded with a darkness which actually doesn't really allow them to do that independently. It's only when you engage them independently and you remind them of their past identity that you begin to penetrate, and that light is still in there. They may have been shrouded with darkness, but when you set them free and they get restored, the light bursts out from under the scales of darkness that cover them. So it's still there, just hidden. But it's also hidden from their view until you remind them and help them.
I think the matrix extends to all the other different dimensions, because once we're given free will, we have we think we have a choice. And just like the 10th chapter of your book, most people don't realize that who they are. I mean, what mankind was meant to be, that they will, their influence would go over the cosmos.
Yeah.
We are multi-dimensional beings. Most people can't get past that. They don't know that their Father loves them unconditionally. And so if free will is given, I think a lot of the other dimensions also are still under the sort of darkness, where they can't think really for themselves.
No, I feel that there is a covering of darkness which stops people from knowing the truth, and it stops beings from knowing the truth until they're encountered by the truth. Then things change. And it's the same with people. How are people going to have their minds renewed? They need some encounters that produce enough cognitive dissonance that they're willing to go through the deconstruction of what they think is true, to bring about the revelation of what is really true. And of course, people are all on their own journey with that. But no, I mean, majority of people don't know who they are. When the majority of people do know who they are, everything will be hugely changed. Fortunately, it doesn't require a majority to know who they are. It just requires the level of enlightenment to increase with those who do know who they are, to be able to counteract the darkness which is operating in those who don't. And that is exponential. It's not equal. So it's exponential in that, let's say one can put 1,000 to 10,000. So we have a 10-fold exponential sense, at least, when it comes to enlightenment in terms of the level of light and darkness. And I think as more and more people become enlightened and their level of enlightenment increases, then more and more the darkness gets dispelled because the light begins to shine. And that light is darkness, it doesn't exist, does it? Darkness is just the absence of light. There isn't really darkness as such, because as soon as you introduce a candle into a dark room, well, the room is no longer dark. So light is the real function, the real purpose. It's the same with evil. You know, did God make evil? Of course he didn't. But when people chose to abandon good, then evil became as a result of what they did in abandoning their walk with God and doing things independently. You know, God didn't make that. God didn't make bad things. People choose to do bad things because they operate independently from their relationship with a good God. So you have all those sort of factors and understandings going on, really. Yeah.
If you look over, I know there's been mystics, but they've been very few in number over the history, relative to the overall believing population.
Yeah.
And the fact is that what you're talking about, Mike, I look at the average person, especially if you went back 200 years ago, they were working just to survive, feed their family, and not die of some disease. And the fact is, to get where someone like yourself or Justin or other people like that, mystics, are today, is like so rare. And if you went back generations before that, near impossible. And I'm just, I guess what I put in there is that there's I know because of our mindsets, but there are so many people, even if I took a look at my grandparents, they were fervent and they were religious and they lived on it, but they only went as far as their mindset took them because they lived by religious rules. But their heart was right and they wanted God. They're just off in the wrong direction, as it seems to be most people throughout history.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy.
No, because the prevailing religious covering of darkness, we went into the dark ages, after all, you know, which then people lost touch with the reality because they were then in a religious system that was promoting a priesthood and all of these mediatorial old covenant mindsets. So people lost touch with the early churches spreading the good news around the world in the light of the Spirit. You know, they didn't use a book, they didn't use rules and regulations. They had the Spirit to guide them, and they had rivers of living water flowing through their inmost being. As the religious system took control and brought us into the dark ages, then people lost touch to the hearing God's voice and operating on, you know, that every day. Now, of course, we don't know how many mystics, because what is the term as a mystic? We probably only hear of high-level mystics who write books or who have history written about them. There could have been many, many more who had nothing written about them, but they still function in that way throughout the earth. So you can't just argue from silence in one sense. Well, there don't seem to be many because we don't know. The only way you're going to know is probably go to the cloud of witnesses and call people and come and talk to them, I guess. But we do have the record of some, and there have been some major lights, but some people wouldn't even know of those that others know of. You know, it's like, how do you know? Well, you know, there are mystics who are sharing some of the very similar things that we're sharing today that operated in Elizabethan times. Jane Lead Ward was one of them, you know, and I'd never heard of her until a couple of years ago. But then I found she wrote this book and several books about things which I resonated with very clearly from what's going on today. So how many were in history? I don't know. we only hear the ones that wrote something that's recorded generally, or that there are some references to testimonies of the amazing things that they might have done. But there may well have been many, many more at a grassroots level that have been working for the bringing about of an unveiling or enlightenment. So what brought us out of the Dark Ages? You know, well, you could talk about the Renaissance or the Protestant Reformation of, you know, but that's really sort of just promoted a different form of religion. You know, who were the people who were actually totally non-conformists and not really operating in accordance to any religious system? Well, you're probably not going to hear about them too much because, you know, no one really wanted them because they all wanted people to support their system. You know, but I do think there are more, and I think there are many more today than we think. And there will be many more coming, you know, because as God reveals himself, people will come into that intimacy, because we're really talking about those who have intimacy with God and can hear his voice directly. You know, that's the basic thing I would call a mystic, is someone who hears God directly, not through any mediator. Well, there's loads of people like that. We just need to help them find their full inheritance and their full identity, that they'll begin to function in their sonship. But God's awakening many to listen to him and hear him. And some of them are not stuck in the religious institutions. They're outside of it. And they're being awakened to the voice of God. So, you know, again, I'm not in any way discouraged by the fact that we only sort of know about a few mystics in writings, because that, you know, how many mystics today, if you include, let's say, the mystic movement of, I don't know how many, tens of thousands, maybe if more than that, possibly, how many of them have written books? So in 100 years' time, it's only those who've written books that are probably going to be remembered. So, but that doesn't mean that there are not thousands or many, many thousands that are not writing books, but are still operating in that realm. You know, now I would postulate that we're all a living epistle or a living book to be a reflection of God's love and his relationship with us on earth as it is in heaven. Therefore, we should be a book to our neighbors, friends, families, and everything else. Even if no one else knows about us, no one else knows the light or the love or the truth, we should be an expression of that, you know, of being the light of the world from a intimacy perspective, the light of love, not just knowledge or information. You know, because I think God is moving us away from, you know, knowledge and information to experience that will bring about revelation and truth. So it's difficult to answer the question because I don't have an absolute answer, but I would suspect that it's probably more than you think.
I was actually coming at it from a bit differently, and that was that I look at people that even today that earnestly seek God.
Yeah,
we might term them as religious, and I even look at my grandparents and stuff, like people like that, and yet they could only go so far, even though their thoughts were totally on God all the time. All they ever talked about was God.
Yeah, but
they hit a wall and they couldn't go any further. And there's been tons of people like that through and that's what the part that I don't get, because if their heart was that way, I don't understand why it just wasn't opened by God.
Well, but you're assuming that they weren't outworking God's purpose in their generation, God's purpose in every generation may be different. David fulfilled God's purpose in his generation. You know, others have, and that purpose is taken into the whole. In the Dark Ages, would be pretty difficult for someone to be a mystic and engage the world in a mystic way. But they probably did have mystics, and they probably did have people who were doing that in their way. So God brings good out of everything, and God's brought good out of every generation. Not every generation operated in the same level of revelation or maturity, and there's been an increasing, I think, level of revelation restored, so that we can get back to at least the revelation the early church had and the experiences the early church had to go on from there. And I think there's been a lot of restoration that was lost in the Dark Ages, and that restoration has had to come at a cost. And some of that cost, is eventually the revelation gets denominalized, into another denominational theology, and then you lose the impetus of it. So religion has always got a habit of taking over and taking the revelation, which could have then increased and increased and increased, and then, making it rigid and fixed, and now it's a denominational group. I'm sure God was at work through Wesley and Whitfield and those in the Methodist revival, obviously, because his presence was there and he did bring revelation of truth, and they did have some restoration of truth, which brought more about relationship and connection and being together in small groups rather than having large church services and all that stuff, which is, going back to, God's intention for relationships. So that was there. But then the next generation sort of, and rather than taking it on, then start to memorialize it and end up solidifying it into, well, this is what Methodism is, and it's now Methodism is so far divorced from what Wesley's initial intention was that a lot of Methodist church don't even have groups. They don't even meet relationally in that way. They just have their Sunday meeting and that's it, or their church preaching circuit and all of that. So we're in a sense where it's not neutral. Whatever God is doing, there is something opposing what he's doing. The leaven of Herod and Pharisees is still in the world, and it still has a tendency to infiltrate whatever God's doing and bring it back to a fixed religious position, because that's what it wants to do. We just need to make sure that doesn't happen with us, and we maintain a willingness to be open and continue the journey into revelation and understanding to bring about God's purposes, which doesn't get, put into a religious, restricted, denominalized group within a movement. But God used those people. God used your grandparents to the level of revelation they had, and he brought good out of things that they did, no doubt. And the prayers that they prayed, which were in alignment with God's heart, were answered. Now, they probably prayed a whole load of things as well out of their own hearts, which probably wasn't, but that's probably true for most people. There's a mixture, and I think you can look back and say they still produced you, which was a good thing. And God is using you, and your inheritance and everything else benefits them. The whole thing of them being part of the cloud of witnesses, they're cheering you on. They want to see you succeed when they may have only partially come so far on their journey. But God uses them. They still got wood, some of the wood, hay, and straw that may have been their lives has been purified by fire, and they've only got gold, silver, and precious stones left. I think it's difficult to frame it into what we're doing today and what they were doing in their day, because it's a very different day. They would have no way of connecting to people around the world or hearing mystics talk about their experiences in one way. And there were a few books, but probably those books were not within the mainstream religious systems because they would have been too controversial, for them to be made well known. Well, even when the charismatic renewal started, certain books became, subversive to the religious systems, so I do feel that God uses everyone to the measure that they're able, and God will bring good out of everything, and God judges people from that perspective. God will not judge your grandparents according to the revelation we've got in our generation. They're judged on the revelation that they had in their generation, and they're only responsible to operate within that revelation.
But Mike, just because there's been mystics in the past, and maybe I'm wrong, and this assumption, but didn't God want my grandparents and everyone else to have the same revelation you have, and even more? Always?
Well, yeah, of course he would have done, but you have to take into account their circumstances and the time scales.
Okay.
What's going on? There are seasons of things that happen, and some of those seasons may be short seasons. Some of those seasons could be 500 years long of something happening to bring people to a future position of revelation, and they have produced us. Now, why have we been chosen to be born in this generation? Because our destiny was for this generation. Theirs wasn't. So God will have known what generation they're going to be born in and what they practically would have been able to fulfill. So he's not going to give them a destiny to have something which they're unable to fulfill in their generation. So I do think God understands, and you know, it's like if we believe that we accepted our scroll of destiny, they accepted theirs, and they were born into generations where they didn't have the level of revelation that we've got now. You know, so I think that's taken into account in what they were able to accomplish in the generation they were born in, and they're only really responsible for fulfilling God's purpose in their generation, and God's purpose for their generation is different from God's purpose in our generation. I think we just need to make sure that we do fulfill God's purpose in our generation by fulfilling our destiny. You know, and there hopefully will be people who come after us, or we continue to walk with those who go further in that than we are. Will I feel jealous of those people? No, because I'm totally content to fulfill the purpose of God in my generation with my destiny. You know, I don't need to think of what some future destiny might be for others that may go way beyond where I am. I'll just rejoice in what they're doing, and hopefully, if we're operating in immortality, help them or encourage them and cheer them on, you know, from the sidelines or even with them, and walk with them into it. You know, I'm very happy for people to go further than me and help point the way to something more, perhaps. But I'm sure your grandparents operated within the thing that they were in, the generation they were in. You know, and obviously when you look back in previous generations, I mean, some pretty amazing things happened. I mean, even the 40s, 50s, all the healing revival, miracles and amazing things. I mean, well, you're not probably seeing those things today necessarily in the same way. But that was a season that God did something. The Toronto thing, which obviously you're very, very familiar with. Well, what did God do in all that? And you look back in hindsight and you can sort of navigate some things which you probably weren't aware of at the time, but it's all part of, I was influenced by what God was doing in that thing, whether it be through, you know, the, you know, ha, 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 ho, 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 of Rodney Howard-Browne and more of the Pentecostal thing, or the charismatic side of that. We were influenced by something and it enlightened us to pursue more. And you're here probably because that enlightenment encouraged you to look forward to more, and you weren't satisfied with staying in that. Even that it was good in the early days, it probably lost the momentum and it didn't go far enough. Okay, where's this going, rather than how can we keep doing the same? You know, and I'm sure they probably tried, but sometimes God works in a particular way with a particular group of people for a particular purpose. And when that purpose is fulfilled, I look back and fondly remember all of those days in that my experiences were opening my heart for what I'm experiencing now. Without that part of my journey, I wouldn't be here. You know, if I hadn't become aware of the supernatural and the weird and wacky stuff and the visionary and the open visions and things that I had during that period, I probably would have struggled to accept the things that happened to me later on when God opened that up for me in a specific way. So it's all part of the rites of passage that we go through, I think. And I'm not God, fortunately, so I don't have to sort of understand how it all works together and is all pieced together as a consistent whole. You know, sometimes I do see a bit more of the jigsaw puzzle, but bottom line is I just need to make sure I fit in the place I'm supposed to be. You know, and I'm not trying to fit in some other place or jam my little jigsaw piece in a place that I'm not supposed to be. You know, so I feel that I am where I'm supposed to be in it. You know, so yeah. So I think your previous generations, your grandchildren, grandfather, parents, and their parents are all part of your heritage. And let's rejoice in the fact that they did sow into them at least a belief in God, and the reality of that being a personal way of experiencing God.
We're assuming that enlightenment doesn't expand and continue on the other side when we transition. They must be looking at us and wondering how backwards we are. I'm talking about as grandparents.
Well, yeah, I mean, in one sense, you could look that in all sorts of different levels. I mean, you look back at our, I was thinking, with the Queen, she was born in 1926, I think. And it's like, I don't even think they had a TV in those days. Probably just started radio and communication. Telegraph was still a form of communication. I mean, look at her 96 years, the changes that have taken place, and you can look back. I mean, our kids would look back and think, what, you had to survive with no communication at all? Well, they didn't have any, did they? Letters. And even letters would have taken a long time to get there, probably. So, things have changed a lot. And spiritually, I don't look back and in any negative sense to the past, because that is part of the history of getting us to where we are now. And I'm so grateful for the revelation of those who helped me, because there have been so many people on my journey that were instrumental in moving me forward with a revelation that they received. Did they have full revelation? No, but their revelation was important to me. And I rejoice and celebrate and are thankful for them. I don't look back and think, well, look at how, how ignorant they were of stuff. I just look at how they operated within their framework and have blessed me, and I want to be a blessing to those who are coming ahead of me, Now, do I expect to be like what they are? Maybe not. Who knows? If we continue to mature, maybe we'll all come to a oneness of the one mind in Christ. And that might be a generation that sees the restoration of all things when we are one heart, one mind, one purpose, rather than being fragmented and fighting our own corner. Maybe that will be the hallmark of huge change, when we can say we are operating in one mind rather than many. But hindsight is always an easy thing to look back. Those who are looking forward, I'm really not looking forward to a future that I want to produce out of my knowledge of the past. I want to see the future and out working with God's purposes and God's desire, which hopefully will be different from what we've had in the past and may look quite different, but let's keep walking it out, because we're only going to get into the future one day at a time. And if we keep walking with God every day and fulfilling our purpose and destiny every day in relationship with him, then we will establish the future out of our relationship with God in the present. And that will be a good future if we're doing it out of relationship. If we decide what we want, that we try to get it, I don't think that will be a sustainable thing. It won't work. We tried that before. What do we want? Well, let's try and make this. Let's just walk out daily, intimacy with the Father, enjoying his presence, being in rest, choosing as a son of God to manifest the kingdom of God through us and around us, and outwork our sonship in government of peace. Then I think the world will continue to change. We will see that transformation take place. It may be too slow for a lot of people, but I don't think you should frame it in a sense of time. It's a sense of increase, rather than just time. And I do think things are increasing, which for me is a very positive thing to behold. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page and we would like to invite you to partner with us. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/freedomarc. Partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.